A crumbling brick facade on Chicago's west side held a century of flour dust and a multi-million-dollar secret. When a ruthless real estate firm offered pennies for a beloved grandmother's abandoned bakery, her skeptical heirs almost signed it away. Then, a hollow wall in the pantry changed absolutely everything. The scent of stale cinnamon and despair hung heavy in the damp Chicago air. Outside the fogged windows of the Sweet Hearth Bakehouse, the gentrified streets of Lincoln Square bustled with oblivious commuters holding overpriced lattes. Inside, the silence was deafening. Noah Dempsey stood in the center of the cracked linoleum floor, a man drowning in a sea of his grandmother's unpaid bills. At 32, Noah was a pragmatic, numbers-driven senior auditor at Grant Thornton. He spent his days dissecting corporate tax discrepancies and optimizing profit margins. Yet looking at the chaotic, towering stacks of final notices and red-inked envelopes scattered across the bakery's display cases, all his financial expertise felt entirely useless. Beatrice Gallagher had been dead for exactly 14 days. To the neighborhood, Beatrice had been a saint, a woman who slipped extra sourdough loaves to struggling families and kept the bakery's neon sign glowing like a beacon through decades of city blizzards. But to the state of Illinois, the IRS, and the First Bank of Chicago, Beatrice Gallagher was a massive compounding liability. The heavy brass bell above the front door chimed, shattering the quiet. Noah's sister, Sarah, stepped inside, shaking the April rain from her umbrella. Her nursing scrubs from Northwestern Memorial Hospital were still damp at the hems, and the dark circles under her eyes mirrored Noah's own exhaustion. "Mitchell Weiss just called," Sarah said, her voice tight as she pulled out a metal stool from the counter. She was referring to the family's probate attorney from Goldberg and Weiss. "The bank isn't granting another extension, Noah. The reverse mortgage on the building maxed out 3 years ago, and there's a massive lien on the commercial ovens. We are officially out of time." Noah rubbed his temples, staring at a rusted commercial-grade Hobart mixer in the corner. "How much, exactly?" "Give me the final number, Sarah." 420,000, she whispered, the number hanging in the air like a death sentence. "If we don't clear it by the end of the month, the bank forecloses. We walk away with nothing, and her estate is bankrupt. Uncle Thomas wants us to wash our hands of it. He says fighting it is financial suicide." Noah gritted his teeth. He knew Uncle Thomas was right, mathematically speaking. The building was old, the plumbing was a disaster, and the roof had been leaking since 2018. But the thought of letting the bank seize Beatrice's life work felt like a betrayal. "There's another option," Sarah added softly, pulling a crisp, cream-colored envelope from her tote bag. "Richard Croft's office messaged me again. Apex Horizon Properties." Noah scoffed, a bitter sound that echoed off the tin ceiling. Richard Croft was a notorious commercial real estate developer sweeping through the West Side, buying up distressed legacy businesses and flattening them into sterile, glass-fronted luxury condominiums. Croft had been circling Sweet Hearth Bakehouse like a vulture for the last 5 years of Beatrice's life. She had always refused him, chasing his associates out of the shop with a flour-dusted wooden spoon. "What is Croft offering now?" Noah asked, already bracing himself for the insult. 450,000, Sarah said, refusing to meet his eyes. "Noah, think about it. It completely clears the debt to the First Bank of Chicago. It pays off the IRS. It covers Mitchell Weiss's legal fees. We would walk away clean. No drawn-out foreclosure. No bankruptcy on Grandma's record. We just sign the deed over on Friday." "He's stealing it," Noah snapped, his voice rising. "Sarah, you know as well as I do that a commercial corner lot in Lincoln Square is worth at least $1.2 million, even with a dilapidated building on it. Croft knows we're backed into a corner. He's offering a fraction of its value because he knows we don't have the capital to hold the property. "Do you have $500,000 sitting in your checking account?" Sarah shot back, her professional composure cracking. "Because I don't. I loved her, Noah. I loved this place. I grew up doing my homework at this very counter. But Grandma is gone. And if we don't sign Croft's paperwork by 3 p.m. this Friday, the bank takes it anyway, and they'll probably sell it to Croft at auction for even less. It's over." The harsh reality of her words settled over the room. Noah looked around the dimly lit bakery. He could almost see Beatrice standing behind the pastry case, her silver hair tied back, her apron covered in a permanent dusting of powdered sugar. He remembered the warmth of the ovens on freezing winter mornings. He remembered the fierce, protective light in her eyes. "Why didn't you tell us, Grandma?" Noah thought, a pang of grief tightening his chest. "Why did you let it get this bad?" "Tell Croft's office to draft the final contract," Noah finally said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I'll do a final walkthrough tomorrow night and clear out her personal belongings. We'll sign on Friday." Sarah gave him a sad, sympathetic nod, squeezing his shoulder before turning to leave. As the door clicked shut behind her, Noah was left entirely alone in the dying bakery. He walked behind the counter and ran his hand along the worn wooden edge. It was the hardest decision of his life, but as an auditor, he had to respect the bottom line. The numbers didn't lie. Beatrice Gallagher had died penniless, and the bakery was nothing but a beautiful sinking ship. Or so he thought. Thursday evening arrived with a violent, rumbling thunderstorm rolling in off Lake Michigan. The rain lashed against the bakery's front windows, distorting the streetlights into blurry, yellow smears. Inside, Noah was on his hands and knees in Beatrice's cramped, windowless back office, surrounded by cardboard moving boxes. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., he would sit in an air-conditioned boardroom in downtown Chicago and hand over the keys to Richard Croft. The thought made his stomach churn, but he had spent the last 4 hours systematically packing away 60 years of a woman's life. The office was a claustrophobic nightmare of paperwork. Beatrice had kept every receipt, every holiday card, and every bakery supply invoice since 1974. Noah tossed bundles of faded paper into heavy-duty trash bags, his throat itching from the decades of accumulated dust. As he was clearing out the bottom drawer of Beatrice's massive, antique oak roll-top desk, his fingers brushed against something strange. The wood at the very back of the drawer felt loose. Frowning, Noah pulled the drawer entirely off its runners and set it on the floor. Reaching into the empty cavity of the desk, he felt a small, recessed lever. He pressed it. Click. A false bottom in this desk's framing dropped open, revealing a hidden compartment. Noah's pulse quickened. He reached inside and pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger. It wasn't like the standard accounting books he had been throwing away. The leather was supple, remarkably well preserved, and the pages were edged in faded gold leaf. Sitting back on his heels, Noah opened the book. The entries were written in Beatrice's distinct, looping cursive, but the contents made absolutely no sense. Noah was a senior auditor. He could read a balance sheet like a musician reads sheet music. The numbers on these pages completely contradicted the narrative of a failing bakery. According to these secret logs, dating back to the late 1980s, large, untraceable sums of cash were flowing into Beatrice's possession. October the 14th, 1992. Deposit received. $45,000. Transfer to TVC. March 3rd, 1998. Asset secured. $110,000. Maintenance to Chicago Iron Works, August 22, 2005. Dividend cleared. $85,000. Stored locally. Stored locally? Noah muttered aloud. The sound of his own voice startled him in the quiet room. There were no bank account numbers, no routing codes, just these cryptic entries and recurring monthly expenses paid out to two entities, TVC and Chicago Iron Works. The amounts were staggering. If this ledger was accurate, Beatrice Gallagher had been moving millions of dollars in untaxed, unrecorded wealth. But where was it? And why would she let the bakery go into foreclosure if she had this kind of capital? He flipped to the very last page of the ledger. There was a final entry, dated just 3 weeks before her death. The handwriting was shaky, clearly written by a woman whose strength was failing her. They are pressing harder. Croft knows too much about the zoning. I will not let them have the foundation. The key is in the flower. 401238. Noah stared at the numbers. 401238. It looked like a combination code. The key is in the flower. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded his veins. He grabbed his heavy metal flashlight and bolted out of the office, heading straight for the basement door. The bakery's basement was a sprawling, cavernous space that used to hold the original coal furnaces and bulk dry storage. It was cold, smelling of wet earth and ancient yeast. Noah descended the creaking wooden stairs, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. The basement was dominated by 4 massive, commercial wooden flour bins built directly into the brickwork along the far wall. They hadn't been used for bulk storage since the 1990s. Beatrice had switched to 50-pound commercial sacks long ago. He approached the largest bin, a towering, 8-foot-tall wooden structure that looked like it weighed a ton. The key is in the flower. Noah inspected the exterior. Nothing. He climbed up on a sturdy wooden crate and shined his light down into the empty, dusty belly of the bin. Nothing but cobwebs. Frustrated, he jumped down, his boots hitting the concrete floor hard. As he landed, his foot struck the base of the bin. He noticed something odd. The concrete floor around the massive wooden structure was deeply scuffed, forming an arc. He knelt down, shining his light at the base. The bin wasn't nailed directly to the floor. It was sitting on heavy, industrial steel casters, cleverly concealed behind a wooden skirt. Noah put his shoulder against the side of the massive wooden bin. He braced his boots against a floor drain and pushed with all his might. His muscles screamed in protest, the veins in his neck bulging. For a moment, it didn't budge. Then, with a horrific, screeching groan of rusted metal against concrete, the heavy bin began to roll along a hidden track. He pushed it 3 feet to the left, gasping for air, the dust thick in his lungs. Noah grabbed his flashlight and aimed it at the wall the bin had been covering. It looked like standard rough-hewn brick. But as he stepped closer, his auditor's eye caught a discrepancy. The mortar around a large rectangular section of the bricks was slightly different in color. A newer, lighter gray compared to the century-old soot-stained cement of the surrounding wall. He balled his hand into a fist and knocked hard against the center of the strange bricks. Thud. Thud. It didn't sound like solid masonry. It sounded dull. It sounded metallic. Noah sprinted back upstairs to the maintenance closet, his heart hammering violently against his ribs. He grabbed a heavy steel crowbar and rushed back down to the basement. Jamming the wedged end of the crowbar into the seam of the lighter mortar, he threw his body weight backward. The brick cracked. He pulled harder, the muscles in his back straining. A massive chunk of the fake veneer brickwork snapped off and crashed to the floor, sending up a cloud of white dust. Noah coughed, waving the dust away, and stepped forward, shining his light into the newly exposed cavity. There, perfectly concealed behind the false wall, was a heavy, brushed steel vault door. It was an industrial-grade safe, the kind you would find in the basement of a major financial institution, complete with a heavy steel wheel and a brass combination dial. Embossed on the steel plate above the dial were the words, Tremont Vault Company, Custom Installations. TVC, Noah realized, his breath catching in his throat. The recurring expense in the ledger. His hands were trembling as he reached out and touched the icy metal of the dial. He remembered the final note from Beatrice's hidden journal. 40-12-38. He cleared the dial, spinning it past 03 times. He turned it carefully to the right, stopping exactly on 40. He reversed direction, turning it past 40 once and stopping on 12. He reversed again, turning it straight to 38. Noah grasped the heavy steel wheel with both hands. He held his breath and pulled downward. With a deep, satisfying clack that reverberated through the basement, the massive internal locking bolts disengaged. The heavy door swung outward on its well-oiled hinges with barely a whisper, releasing a rush of cool, impeccably dry, climate-controlled air. Noah raised his flashlight, stepped over the threshold, and crossed from a dinging, bankrupt bakery into a room that was about to shatter his entire reality. Noah stepped over the heavy steel threshold, his flashlight beam sweeping across the darkness until a set of motion sensor LED lights violently flickered to life. The sudden illumination revealed a space that defied all logic. It was a 10 by 15-foot reinforced concrete bunker, entirely isolated from the dampness of the basement. The air hummed with the quiet mechanical purr of an off-grid dehumidification system. But it wasn't the engineering that made Noah drop his heavy metal flashlight to the floor with a clatter. It was the shelving. Lining all four walls were heavy-duty industrial racks, bowing slightly under immense weight. On the bottom tier sat dozens of vintage wooden crates, each stenciled with faded black lettering. Chicago Iron Works, 1928. Noah, his hands trembling uncontrollably, walked to the nearest crate and pried the loose wooden lid open. Gold. Solid, perfectly cast gold bullion. Dozens of heavy, gleaming bars were stacked neatly within the straw packing. Noah's breath hitched. A standard gold bar weighed 400 troy ounces. Just one of these bars was worth over $750,000 in today's market, and there were at least 30 crates. Above the gold sat rows of heavy canvas bags, stamped with the insignia of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Noah unzipped the nearest bag. Inside were immaculate, banded stacks of Series 1934 $1,000 bills and extremely rare $10,000 notes, currency that hadn't been in public circulation for decades, yet remained entirely valid and astronomically valuable to high-end numismatic collectors. "My God, Grandma," Noah whispered into the silence. "What did you do?" In the exact center of the room, resting on a small steel pedestal, was a single, pristine manila envelope. Across the front, in Beatrice's elegant, looping cursive, read 2 words: "For Noah." He tore the envelope open. Inside was a notarized affidavit, several original property deeds, and a 3-page handwritten letter. Noah leaned against a stack of gold and began to read. "My dearest Noah, if you are reading this, it means my heart finally gave out, and my smartest grandson figured out the puzzle. I'm sorry for the deception. I'm sorry for the unpaid bills on the counter. It was the only way to keep them from realizing what I had found. When I bought this building in 1974, I purchased it for pennies from the city after the previous owner, Harrison Croft, went to federal prison for racketeering and tax evasion. The neighborhood always whispered that Harrison had hidden a massive fortune before the FBI raided his empire, but nobody ever found it. I found it in 1989, completely by accident, when a plumber accidentally cracked the basement foundation while trying to fix a frozen pipe. The wealth in this room is staggering, Noah. But it was cursed. If I had suddenly paid off my mortgage in cash or bought a new house, the Croft family would have known I found Harrison's vault. Harrison's son was dangerous, and his grandson, Richard Croft, is even worse. Richard has spent the last decade trying to buy this building from me. He didn't want the bakery. He didn't care about the zoning or luxury condos. He just wanted his grandfather's blood money back. I couldn't report it. If I handed it to the authorities, the city and the IRS would have seized it all in civil asset forfeiture. So I claimed it legally through a very quiet, slow process of adverse possession and salvage rights with the help of a silent trust lawyer in New York. The assets are legally mine, and now they are yours and Sarah's. But Richard Croft realized time was running out. He used his connections at the First Bank of Chicago to freeze my credit lines and accelerate the foreclosure. He wanted to starve me out. I needed to keep up the appearance of a bankrupt old woman right until the end. Do not let Croft take the bakery. Use the currency in the red lockbox on the top shelf. It is clean, untraceable, and ready to liquidate. Beat him at his own game, Noah. I love you. Grandma Beatrice. Noah lowered the letter, a profound mix of awe and fury washing over him. Beatrice hadn't been a victim of the changing economy. She was a master tactician who had spent 30 years outsmarting a ruthless Chicago real estate dynasty, sleeping directly above a $20 million fortune while pretending she couldn't afford to fix the roof. Noah looked at his watch. It was 3:15 a.m. on Friday. The signing with Richard Croft was scheduled for 3 p.m. today. Noah didn't have time to sleep. He grabbed the red steel lockbox from the top shelf, hauling it under his arm. He securely locked the heavy vault door behind him, slid the massive wooden flour bin back over the false wall, and ran up the stairs. He had an empire to save. At 2:45 p.m. on Friday afternoon, the conference room at Goldberg and Weiss was oppressively quiet. High above the bustling traffic of Michigan Avenue, Sarah sat at the polished mahogany table, nervously shredding a paper napkin in her lap. Across the table sat Richard Croft. He was a picture of arrogant perfection, dressed in a bespoke charcoal Tom Ford suit, idly tapping a solid gold Mont Blanc pen against his leather portfolio. He checked his Rolex, a smug, predatory smile playing on his lips. "Mitchell," Croft drawled, looking at the probate attorney. "It's 10 minutes to 3. I have a tea time at Medina Country Club at 4. Let's just have Sarah sign as the co-executor, and we can wire the funds to clear your grandmother's unfortunate debts." Sarah looked at Mitchell Weiss, her eyes welling with tears. "We should wait for Noah. He said he'd hard be here." "Your brother is an auditor, Sarah. He knows exactly what happens if this isn't signed by 3 o'clock, Croft said smoothly, sliding the thick stack of contract papers across the table. "The bank forecloses. You get nothing. I'm doing your family a massive favor." Before Sarah could pick up the pen, the heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open with enough force to crack against the doorstop. Noah Dempsey walked in. He was still wearing the same clothes from the night before, covered in faint streaks of white flour and basement dust. He hadn't slept, and his eyes were wet-filled with adrenaline, but his posture was terrifyingly calm. He carried a slim, black leather briefcase. "Put the pen down, Sarah," Noah commanded, his voice echoing off the glass walls. Croft sighed, rolling his eyes. "Noah, so glad you could join us. You look like you slept in a dumpster. Let's get this over with." "We aren't signing anything, Richard," Noah said, walking slowly to the table. He didn't sit down. He stood directly across from the real estate developer, staring down at him. "Excuse me," Mitchell Weiss interjected, adjusting his glasses. "Noah, if you don't sign this sale agreement, the First Bank of Chicago will seize the deed at the end of the business day." "No, they won't," Noah said softly. He unlatched the black briefcase. He had spent the entire morning in the private, heavily guarded offices of a premier rare currency broker in the Diamond District, a contact provided by one of his firm's wealthiest private clients. The broker had nearly fainted when Noah presented 50 pristine, authenticated Series 1934 $1,000 bills from the red lockbox. The transaction had been swift, legally ironclad, and extremely lucrative. Noah pulled a crisp, blue cashier's check from his jacket pocket and placed it delicately on the mahogany table in front of the lawyer. "Mitchell, that is a certified bank draft for $450,000. It completely clears the First Bank of Chicago's lien, pays off the IRS, and covers your legal retainer. The Sweet Hearth Bakehouse is completely debt-free. You can call the bank and verify the transfer." Sarah gasped, clapping her hands over her mouth. Richard Croft stopped tapping his pen. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax mannequin. He stared at the check, then looked up at Noah, his composure shattering. "Where did you get that money?" Croft demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, guttural whisper. "That bakery is bankrupt. Your grandmother was penniless." Noah leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the table, bringing his face inches from Croft's. "It's amazing what you can find when you clean out an old basement," Noah whispered, just loud enough for Croft to hear. "I found a lot of history down there, Richard. A lot of old, heavy wooden crates. From Chicago Iron Works, wasn't it? Stamped 1928. Croft's eyes widened in sheer panic. His jaw actually dropped. The realization hit him like a freight train. Noah had found Harrison's vault. "You," Croft stammered, his polished veneer entirely destroyed. That property doesn't belong to you. That is my family's legacy." "Actually," Noah said, standing up tall and straightening his dusty jacket, "according to adverse possession laws, the statute of limitations on abandoned contraband, and my grandmother's perfectly executed salvage claims dating back to 1991, every single ounce of that legacy belongs to the Gallagher estate. Legally, entirely, and permanently." Croft stood up abruptly, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. "I will sue you. I will tie you up in litigation for the next 20 years. I will destroy you. If you ever come within 500 feet of my bakery, or my sister," Noah countered. His paw, like ice. "I will take the leather ledger I found in my grandmother's desk, the one detailing your grandfather's extortion rackets and your family's historical tax evasion, and I will personally hand-deliver it to the director of the FBI. You'll lose a lot more than a real estate deal, Richard. You'll lose your freedom." The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Mitchell Weiss looked between the two men, entirely bewildered. Sarah was staring at her brother as if he were a superhero. Croft's chest heaved. He looked at the cashier's check, then at Noah's unblinking, victorious glare. Knowing he was completely beaten, Croft snatched his leather portfolio off the table, turned on his heel, and stormed out of the conference room without another word. The heavy glass door slammed shut behind him. Noah let out a long, shaky breath, the adrenaline finally beginning to recede. "Noah," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "What just happened? Where did you get that money?" Noah looked at his sister, a genuine, exhausted smile breaking across his face. "Grandma left us a little something in the flour bins, Sarah. Come on, let's go home. We have a bakery to renovate." 6 months later, the Sweethearth Bakehouse reopened its doors to a line that stretched all the way down the block. The crumbling brick facade had been beautifully restored, the roof was brand new, and the interior glowed with warm, modern lighting over the antique pastry cases. Behind the counter, Sarah was handing out free sourdough loaves to the neighborhood children, just like Beatrice used to do. Noah stood near the register, looking perfectly at home in an apron, having officially resigned from his auditing firm. He didn't need the salary anymore. The remaining assets in the vault had been quietly transferred to a highly secure, diversified family trust, generating enough legal taxed income to keep the bakery thriving for the next 100 years. Deep in the newly renovated basement, behind a solid wall of fresh concrete, the empty steel vault remained, a quiet monument to a grandmother's brilliant deception and the hidden treasure that proved she was never truly defeated. What an incredible twist of fate. Beatrice Gallagher proved that a grandmother's love and brilliant strategy can outsmart even the most ruthless corporate sharks. If you were captivated by this incredible true-life story of hidden millions and family loyalty, please hit that like button. Don't forget to share this video with someone who loves a good mystery and subscribe to our channel for more amazing, real-life dramatic stories every single week. See you in the next one.